Rogamos comprueben que tienen desconectados sus teléfonos móviles. Muchas gracias. Please check that your mobile phones are switched off. Thank you very much.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good evening. We would like to welcome you on behalf of the BBVA Foundation to the second event organized by the Foundation. And with this, we would like to join as a collaborating bank to the conference chaired by Chile, but which, as you know, is taking place in Madrid, COP25, the framework, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The first one was held on the 2nd of December, led by Professor Stevens. He's the head of the Department of Meteorology of the Max Planck Institute in Germany, and he's one of the leading experts and one who's led the awards that we have on climate change. This is an area that's very close to our heart in the Foundation for over 3 decades. We started focusing on Spain combined with Latin America, and in recent years, perhaps the last decade, we've expanded our scope to the whole world. A few years ago, we initiated Frontiers of Knowledge Awards with several categories, 2 of which are related to the problem of climate change, to send out the signal that that knowledge is just as important as information technologies, medicine, and other sciences. The 2 areas that we chose, which are the most core areas, so to speak, of the environment, ecology and conservation, and the problem of climate change. Among the prize winners of these 11 editions, we've had figures, worldwide renowned figures, who have contributed to these 2 areas. And since that time, for 2 decades now, we've been supporting scientific research, providing awards for society, primarily in Spain and more recently at a worldwide level. In a few minutes, we will have the honor to have here with us the first prize winner who was given an award, McGrath, who was the main BBC journalist who is covering this conference, and we will have with us on the month of April because we will be presenting him with an award, and he will be delivering a speech at that time in April. This evening, we have an absolutely extraordinary activity given the profile of our two speakers. And of course, given the topic chosen. First of all, I would like to refer to Professor Duarte. You are very familiar with him. I'm sure you all know him very well. He's one of our main, not just our, but worldwide marine ecologist, and he's specialized in marine ecology in combination with the study of climate change and the impact of climate change on ecosystems, on marine ecosystems. His career has been extremely successful. He was a research professor at the Higher Research Institute in Spain. He was a professor in Australia, and in recent years, he has a chair at the King Abdullah University in Saudi Arabia, where he heads one of the most powerful groups studying ecology and climate change. He has received many awards, and the most recent one, the Ramon Margalef Award. Furthermore, he's one of our main collaborators since the very beginning. For the last 2 decades, he has worked with us. If we see all his publications, many of them, our publications are signed by Professor Duarte. He's organized workshops, and with him, we reorganized the lighthouse in Mallorca so that it would become a marine research center. He's very well loved by all of us. He's a member of the jury of climate change awards of our foundation, and he's also led the Environmental Communication Award. And our second speaker is an absolute figure in himself, a personality, William McDonough. Is a very well-known American architect who's contributed to develop, most significantly, the concepts of sustainability and circular economy, precisely the axis of today's presentations, both the two presentations and the debate that will ensue the presentations. He has been a professor and dean of the Faculty of Architecture in Virginia. He was the founder of 2 leading-edge firms related to environmental design and sustainable design. And at a very early age, he was a visionary. As we mentioned a few minutes ago, his books were published in the year 2000, and it was translated into Spanish in the year 2003. And we hope that this publication is circulated again from cradle to cradle, which is what he will be talking about this evening, to change the concept of the cycle of how we design things and how we produce them. He has received in many, many different awards, and the main award on the environment, the Presidential Award for Sustainable Development. He has received an award from the Smithsonian, and 2 years ago from the Davos Forum as well. So in short, we have 2 absolutely exceptional speakers of very international renown, and they will each be presenting, and then we'll have a discussion. I know they have a very, very tight schedule. They're both participating at COP25, and we are very grateful on behalf of all of you here today. And I also thank you for being here, and the fact that it's the end of a long weekend and it's a national holiday. So it shows that our society is very concerned about the issue of climate change. So we're very grateful for the effort you've made and giving us the opportunity of learning about your view on this issue. So Professor Duarte, whenever you're ready.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I would like to start by thanking Professor Pardo and the BBVA Foundation for having so kindly invited me to spend this evening with you and talk about the work we are carrying out, because we are at the foundation right now, Bill McDonough and I, working on a new concept that we're developing, which we believe can help integrate many of the solutions that are being proposed to resolve the problem of climate change systematically and systemically. We are going to give you a few ideas on the possible solutions in my presentation, his presentation, and then we too will be discussing or debating these concepts, and we will also like to welcome you to participate in that debate, because I am also going to be speaking in English for my colleague Bill McDonough. So any of you who need interpretation, please get a headset. So during my presentation, you will be able to listen to the Spanish interpreters. I will then begin with my presentation, which is what I want to talk about, a new concept that we're currently developing in a slightly different way. Paradigm shift of circular economy to include carbon.
About a circular carbon economy and how we can learn from nature in finding a solution to the problem of climate change. So I'd like to start from the very beginning. And if we look at the Earth, when it cooled down and formed a planet, before life emerged on Earth, then planet Earth was very similar to Venus. So if we look at the gas composition, then this is Venus and this is Earth before life. So very similar carbon dioxide concentration, 96-98%, no oxygen, and very high temperatures, 460 degrees in Venus versus about 300 degrees on the Earth before life emerged. So life that came to Earth, and particularly photosynthesis that came with the advent of cyanobacteria, radically transformed planet Earth into something very different from Venus, into this. So carbon dioxide was reduced to only 0.03%, and oxygen was increased to 21%. And that was done through the linkage between carbon dioxide and oxygen through photosynthesis. So it was life that modified planet Earth and made it into what we have today, which is a planet where life thrives and is an inhabitable planet. So since life reduced carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and then made temperatures compatible with life thriving around the Earth and transformed that carbon dioxide into living carbon, that also accumulated organic matter in the biosphere, in soils, in the ocean, in sediments. So carbon started to accumulate in an organic form away from the atmosphere, where it generated greenhouse effects that led to very high temperature. And as life continued to progress, it accumulated biomass and diversified life forms and became more complex and develop more interactions between different life forms that optimize the use of this carbon and minimize the waste, the carbon that was not being used in the food web. So this generated a stable Earth system. And climate stability was then achieved through a close balance between photosynthesis and production that takes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through plants in the ocean and land, and then brings it into a living form in the ocean and land, and that removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And then this photosynthesis and carbon is used to support growth, respiration, reproduction, and also all of the functional processes that keep organisms alive. And respiration is the process that releases that energy contained within organic matter and makes use of that energy to support all of the functioning and all of the processes of the living organisms. So right now, every year, photosynthesis on land and the ocean takes about 200 gigatons of carbon as carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and brings it into organic form. And then this organic carbon is then used to support ecosystems and respiratory processes, then release that carbon again as carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. So this is a loop that is called the carbon cycle, that is the fundamental engine of life and is the function upon which stability of the climate in the Earth system depends. And this is based on the operation of life, which is the natural capital that maintains this circular carbon economy, which we call the carbon cycle. And this is very perfectly close tune match, which only about a 0.1% offset from year to year between production and respiration. In fact, marine scientists and land scientists are challenged to demonstrate whether these two entities, production and respiration, are different, because those are very, very big numbers that are very close to each other, and the error margins are such that really we cannot demonstrate that they're different. So they're very closely tuned, and they move a lot of carbon every year from the atmosphere to the oceans and land and back to the atmosphere in a perfect circular loop. And this process have kept the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere very stable, oscillated due to other processes for about 1 million years. And the coupled production respiration loop of the carbon cycle is the component of the biosphere, that if we think as the biosphere as a supraorganism, if you remember the Gaia theory that talks about the biosphere as an organism that is able to keep homeostasis, so that has kept climatic stability for 1 million years. But you can see also that something has happened at the end of the period here, where carbon dioxide has escaped from this narrow oscillation, and that's due to human intervention. So a simple account of anthropogenic climate change in this context is that humans have developed the capacity to respire not only inside our bodies, like all organisms do in the mitochondria, but we have developed the capacity of releasing energy from organic matter outside our bodies. First by burning wood, by fire, and then eventually by using engines and motors and other devices that take organic matter as fossil fuel and burn it to release energy. And it's the same as respiration. So we take organic matter, and then through this combustion process that happens now on an engine rather than inside our bodies, we release energy, and this releases carbon dioxide and consumes oxygen, just like respiration does. But it happens outside our bodies, and therefore is free from the constraints that carbon must come from photosynthesis. So now we have removed ourselves from this constraint, and we have added a component of respiration that I call exosomatic respiration. That is our use of fossil fuels. That is a component of respiration that adds to the respiration of the biosphere. So we have enhanced respiration by about 5%, and we have also depleted production. We have depleted production, so the production is lower than it used to be in the past, because we have depleted forests, both of land and on the ocean, and we have depleted life. So we have both altered this balance by increasing respiration and decreasing production. So this loss of forests, of biomass on land and the oceans, is responsible for 18% of the legacy greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And we can think that this was a problem of the past and that we are no longer deforesting the biosphere, but we are. And in the last decade, changes in ecosystems were responsible for 24% of the emission of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So we continue to deplete this natural capital, these forests on land and the ocean that keep the production, that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and we keep adding to this respiration through the use of fossil fuels. So this is a disruption of the circular carbon economy of the biosphere, where we have operated in both sides to unbalance this cycle. And this can bring the Earth system to a tipping point that we are now discussing that we are maybe approaching a tipping point where the climate system can accelerate its change beyond the limits that might be conducive to human well-being and a healthy and sustainable society. And this is so because with the increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, temperature is increasing, and temperature accelerates respiration. So respiratory processes, as the temperature of the biosphere increases, then respiration rates increase. So we are also enhancing respiration through that, and that perturbation that we have made to the carbon cycle can also cascade down into impacting on the natural processes of respiration. So it is important that we contain this perturbation and we return back to a closed loop of a carbon cycle. So it is essential that we learn from nature and we understand how nature works and how maintain climate stability before we started to disrupt this system. And then we seek inspiration on the different mechanisms by which the biosphere achieves a circular carbon economy, right? So we need to embed societal processes, all of them, into a circular carbon economy context, so that if we enhance respiration, we also remove greenhouse gases in processes that are in balance, right? But before we can achieve a circular carbon economy, we need to achieve a positive one, because we have already upset the system. So to make it balanced, we need to enhance production much more than respiration. So we need to intervene in many different areas to be able to re-establish this balance. So industry needs to think of their own processes in the context of the carbon cycle. And there's only one industry that has been thinking for some time in terms of the carbon cycle. And Camilo José Cela, in his memoirs, he talks about, he was living in a pension in Oviedo in the 1930s, where the owner of the pension was also the owner of a funerary house called the Carbon Cycle. And even today, in this magazine of the funerary industry in Spain, called Servicios Exequiales, there's an article about the role of ashes, the cenizas, in the carbon cycle and how we can use the cenizas to restore fertility of soils and so on. So the funerary industry has been thinking in terms of their role in the carbon cycle, and you can even now opt for an eco-funeral where your own remains are becoming part of the carbon cycle. But it's not about funerals only. It should be more about other elements of industry that see themselves how they can participate in a circular carbon economy beyond funerals. Right. So the step one is to rebuild nature. And nature is the new capital. And nature is the enabling capital, because humanity depends on the interest or currencies that flow from this capital. And those interests that flow from this capital are clean air and water, food, raw materials and genetic resources, climate regulation, like carbon CO2 sequestration that we were discussing, resilience to disturbance, and also cultural values that support human well-being. And none of this can be substituted by any other capital. So it is imperative that we restore natural capital, because during the 20th century, we have lost half of the natural capital of the planet. Half of the forests on land and the ocean, half of the abundance of life in the ocean. We have lost this through the certification that is not only occurring on land, but it's only occurring underwater. So we're losing forests, we're losing mangroves, we're losing salt marshes. We have lost half of the corals of the world, which are also stone forests, and we need to restore those, to restore that balance. And while the interests of that depleted natural capital are becoming smaller and smaller as we erode this capital, then the number of people that require those interests are growing, because we keep adding more people to planet Earth. So it's imperative not that we conserve and sustain, which has been the conversation for the last 30 years, but we need to be more ambitious and audacious, and we need to restore and we need to rebuild. So conserving and sustaining what is left is no longer an acceptable goal. We need to rebuild, because otherwise there is no way we can restore the circular economy of the biosphere. So rebuilding is an imperative. And the natural capital is made of carbon. So sometimes we talk about decarbonizing society and decarbonizing our lives, but we ourselves are made out of carbon. It's a problem not of carbon, it's a problem of managing that carbon in a positive way. And living carbon is positive carbon because it generates benefits, right? So what we need is to move more of this carbon dioxide that is in the atmosphere creating troubles into living carbon, both green carbon on land and blue carbon in the ocean that generates benefits. And I'll give some examples of how this carbon generates benefits for all, focusing on climate benefits. So I am submitted that the challenge for society is to rebuild a natural capital, and to do that we need to double natural capital. And this is going to be very hard to do. It's going to be challenging, but it's not impossible. And when President Kennedy decided to launch a project to bring Americans into the moon, he said that he was doing it not because it was easy, but because it was hard. In this case, this is going to be hard, but it's also necessary. It's absolutely and fundamentally necessary that we do that. So it's going to be hard, but it's fundamentally necessary that we succeed in doing that. And this requires that we combat desertification both on land and oceans, but rebuilding green forests and also blue forests. But also we have to rebuild all other forms of life. Everything from microbes to elephants and whales, they will play a role in regaining this balance of the biosphere, and it can be done. So I've been working with colleagues, including Susan Agustin in this room, on a strategy to rebuild marine life by 2050. We're going to be publishing this next year, and we show that in this is hard, but it's not impossible. So we can do it, and we need to get to do that right away. So it is beyond forest, and for instance, rebuilding the large stocks of marine animals also captures carbon in positive forms. So this is a paper released by economists, not by ecologists, this month in December, from the Finance and Development Journal of December issue, where they went in to calculate that if we were to rebuild the stocks of large whales in the ocean, that will sequester 1 petagram of carbon per year, right? And this is a dream, but it's not an impossible dream. We can do it. But if we already see what we achieved already, if we look at humpback whales, in the 1970s, there were only 200 animals left in the world. And they seem to be committed to extinction. But through the moratorium on whaling from the International Whaling Commission, then the stock and the population of humpback whales have recovered, and by now we have more than 60,000 whales in only 30 years in the ocean. And that biomass alone of these whales represent a sequestration of about 50,000 tons of carbon in that population of whales. But the whales do more than just storing carbon on themselves. They move nutrients, they accelerate and enhance the nutrient cycle, and they accelerate the productivity of the oceans. They keep the ocean fertile. So as we rebuild whales and other animals like elephant seals, then the oceans become more productive and more able to contribute to sequester more carbon. So you derive more benefits, and it's a virtuous circle of improving the biosphere, and in doing so, also improving the capacity of the biosphere to be able to achieve balance as it had before. And another animal that was restored from the brinks of extinction is the northern elephant seal, that I do a lot of work with the movement of northern elephant seals. And in the end of the 19th century, there were only 20 animals left. And they seem to be, again, committed to extinction. By now, there's 250,000 animals in the American Pacific alone, and that biomass alone represents 25,000 tons of carbon that is being held in elephant seals. So we've done it already. We've done it for a few animals, and we can do it for all of the large whales, and we can do it for any animals, even fish stocks. And we can rebuild abundance in the ocean, and in doing so, we can restore the biosphere to being able to achieve that balance and that resilience that we destroyed by destroying this biomass during 150 years. But there are other processes that we can seek inspiration for. The carbon cycle also contains a non-living loop that is called the carbonate silicate cycle that operates on long time scales, where weathering, erosion, weathering of silicate and dissolution of carbonates sequesters carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This usually works on geological timescales, so you need to look at thousands and tens of thousands of years for this to operate. But if we understand the processes, we can also harness that capacity and accelerate it ourselves, because we're already mining silicate and carbonates for other purposes, but we can use those existing deposits of silicate and carbonate that are already grinded, waiting for us to use them, to dissolve them, and in doing so sequester carbon dioxide from the ocean, and do that in a safe manner. So this is possible, and we should look at more mechanisms, and there are more and more mechanisms in nature the deeper we look. Even the most modest of animals, like the oyster, can be an unsung climate warrior. So the oyster, the very modest oyster, has an enzyme that we also have called carbonic anhydrase that we use ourselves to produce our bones. And when we are in an environment that is enriched in carbon dioxide, the way we remove that excess carbon dioxide is we use that enzyme to put it into our bones. Then it becomes a problem because we develop osteoporosis. But the oysters, they produce carbon dioxide through respiration, but if the carbon dioxide accumulates, the pH of the water will go down and the shells will dissolve. So they need to get rid of that carbon dioxide, and what they use this carbonic anhydrase to trap that carbon dioxide and convert it into their own shells, right? So if we take this carbonic anhydrase, we learn from the oyster, and we bring that to an industrial scale, and take that carbonic anhydrase, improve it, and we use it to trap carbon dioxide from burning and combustion processes, we can actually produce cement with it without generating any emissions. So we actually solve two problems with one solution, which will be bringing carbonic anhydrase inspired by the very modest oyster. And there are many, many animals and organisms and microbes that we can learn from, and we can derive many solutions from them and derive inspiration from nature, even though we don't need to plant trees or grow animals to do that. We just can learn how nature does it and reproduce that with technology and artificial systems. So nature-inspired solutions involve many, many different approaches: how nature uses dead matter to support growth and fertility, how nature creates complexity and redundancy to generate resilience, how nature removes toxic materials to maintain healthy ecosystems, how nature adapts to change, how can we adapt to change and construct systems that are adapting to change rather than be vulnerable to sea level rise or storms, how biology cooperates across multiple levels to generate holobionts, which are organisms that cooperate to generate resilient systems and healthy systems like ourselves and the microbes that we have in our guts, and how information is packaged, transferred, and improved in DNA, right? If we are able to compress information and package it in DNA with the same efficiency, we can actually reduce storage, and we can reduce the energy that is required to keep servers and storage systems for our growing demands for internet services. So that, again, we can learn from nature. And this is an endless learning path, and it requires also a process of humility, where we need to recognize that we thought we could dominate nature. We need to come back to think that we are at the service of nature, and we have still much to learn from nature to solve our own pressing problems in the environment. Not only in climate change, but all of the sustainability crises can be addressed by being inspired by nature rather than try to destroy it. So thank you very much, and I will hand over to my colleague Bill.
Hello, everybody. It's a privilege to be here and to follow Carlos, a great friend and colleague. I'm going to wait for my slides, I think. I want to talk about design today. I see design as the first signal of human intention. What are we intending to do? And how do we act upon that? when I see the climate change and we see the planet with the mass of excuse me. Oh, I'm ready to click. Is it working? Thanks. When we see that most of the Earth is under human management at this point, certainly most of the large mammals, and that we see so many systems in decline, we can ask ourselves, is that our plan? Because if it's not our plan, it seems to be the de facto plan, the thing that's happening because we have no other plan. So perhaps it's time for a new plan. So we can ask ourselves, if design is intention, did we actually intend to poison the air, the water, the soil every year? If so, we're doing a great job. But if it's not the plan, what's the plan? So if our intention is a healthy planet, healthy ecosystems, and healthy people, then what's the plan? It would be for cities that breathe. Think about China. I'll show you. We're bringing geothermal to China and taking down the chimneys and putting in geothermal for the district heating systems. What happens when you do that? Not only do you get renewable power that's free, but you get clean air. And all of a sudden we're starting to deal with healthy systems again. This is what we want. And the Chinese call this design for eco-civilization. And what you were realizing in the carbon part, which is what we're talking about today, this would be positive. This is a positive step. And I think it's really important for us to understand that this idea of human health and climate change are connected. This is a diagram that 90% of the people on the planet are breathing dangerous, polluted air. Is that the plan? And it's interesting to note that the people making all the decisions around this, there are lots of them. You know, we're right up here, right? We're up here talking about it. We're not even talking about it over here at this point, sorry. But you know, look at what's happening, and yet here we are. Look, astonishing. So if that's our plan, we're doing great. If it's not our plan, who has the plan? Because climate change is obviously causing massive destruction and disasters. Fine. If your children went around the house causing now massive destruction and disasters all day long, you might want to say to them not, oh, you should be less bad. We want to say, what about more good? How do we make the world better because we're here, not worse or less worse? What is this about? How do we make the world more good? And part of that is changing the way we see. When someone comes to me and says, my garden is looking worse and worse every day, and we think, well, what if you change the way you see? What if you pretend you're a butterfly? The garden is looking better every day. So what lenses are we using to see this world? So I had the privilege of representing the United States for 10 years. I was chair of the China-US Center for Sustainable Development, something set up after the visit of Zhu Rongji to the White House, and they decided to give each other gifts. So the gift of the United States to China and vice versa was, let's share information about sustainable development. What a wonderful gift. It was very easy to do because nobody knew what it meant. And so the Republicans couldn't complain about it because they didn't know what it was. So this is Deng Xiaoping's daughter. She ran the Earth Summit for China. And this is us sharing a paper that we created called the Cradle to Cradle Circular Economy Leading to Ecological Civilization. And just think about the conversations that are going on between the United States and China now. This is 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And now our conversations have divested into throwing things at each other. The circular economy became the 12th and 13th five-year plans of China. The 13th five-year plan is in its final stages, The first was promote the circular economy. This last one, implement the circular economy. And we're doing implementation of the circular economy in China. The World Economic Forum 5 years ago decided to start paying attention to circular economy. I had the privilege of being the chair of their Meta Council on Circular Economy. Ellen MacArthur is my vice chair, Francois Houghton there from Philips, the head of Heineken. And so all of a sudden this is front and center at the World Economic Forum. But be very careful, because the circular economy is not the linear economy, take, make, waste, in a circle. Because if we keep repeating what we're doing over and over again, we will toxify. There are so many products today that are toxic that if we have a circular economy of toxic things, we end up with retox. What we need is detox, not retox. Okay? Now, I'll show you, this works at every scale, from the molecule to the product, to the building, to the planet. And right now, we're about at buildings and communities. But as Carlos mentioned, we're on our way to look at the whole planet. Now, recently, the Vintage Press in London published Cradle to Cradle, our book, in a collection of 5 books that changed the world. And we had the great privilege of seeing that Cradle to Cradle was put next to On the Origin of Species. Isn't that exciting? And so when you think about it, what we're saying here is that we have 2 metabolisms, the living metabolism and the technical metabolism. And this is becoming the basis for circular economy. First we did that with China, now we see Ellen MacArthur adopting it, and so on. And so if you think about this, Francis Crick, 9 years after discovering DNA, and some years after Einstein's special theory of relativity, came together for me in a strange way. I started thinking about the planet and thinking about E equals mc squared when I was a college student. And my professor said, solve that equation, because my question was, since being born in Japan, how did Hiroshima disappear? And he said, read this and solve that equation. I couldn't do it. And I stared at it, E equals mc squared, E equals mc squared. Then I saw fire burning in my fireplace. We were in New Hampshire. And I was looking at entropy and thinking, oh no, entropy. Everything's going to chaos, never to return. And it's a law of physics. So chaos is the law. So this is pretty terrifying for someone like me, because I just see chaos and I couldn't solve the equation. So I went to the library looking for negative entropy, because I was from Asia, and there must be the opposite. So what would negative entropy be? And I couldn't find it. So I got back to my room and I looked at the fire burned down and I said, oh, there it is. Negative entropy was the log that was burning. It was order out of chaos that then was going into entropy. So I realized that if you look at E equals mc squared and you want to know how Hiroshima disappeared, well, C is the big number, 186,000 miles per second, square it. So almost infinity squared, which means that if m is in any way a positive number, as in one hydrogen atom, then the E is infinity squared. That's the bomb. The m is the atom. What is missing from that story? That chaos. It's a thing we haven't even put a letter on, B. It's biology. And so when you stop and think about it, we saw that picture of Venus and the Earth. Well, we have the sun shining on the Earth, that's income. And we have carbon in the atmosphere, and that's being drawn down to Earth. And we end up with what? Biology. The rock with water is chemistry, E, M. And then we get this thing, and we have soil, and we have life. And isn't it amazing that the word human, and the word humus, and the word humility all come from the same root? To be humble is to be grounded. So I became a soil person. We are the people of the soil. So we start to realize that if we destroy our soil, we destroy ourselves. So I started thinking, well, if we have design then, what we should be designing is things that go back to natural systems where waste equals food. So beautiful. And they're delightful. If you think about a cherry tree in the spring, thousands of blossoms just in case one of them attracts the right bee, so it gets pollinated, and maybe creates another cherry that maybe gets eaten by a bird and maybe causes another cherry tree. Isn't it beautiful? And we get fast fashion. We have this pink ephemera that explodes in this beautiful way and becomes soil immediately. It's quite astonishing, really. So waste equals food in natural systems. And what Francis Crick saw 9 years after discovering DNA, he wrote an essay called On the Nature of Vitalism. And he decided to be a living thing, you have to have growth. If you're not growing, you're dying. In order to grow, you have to have income. And income comes from the sun and the atmosphere. And you have to have an open metabolism of chemicals operating for the benefit of the organisms and their reproduction. So, biological cycles. Now, what if we took that inspiration for some things we can literally consume, and we call ourselves consumers? Who here has consumed a television set lately? Right? We talk about being consumers of electronics. I mean, go ahead, eat it, but good luck. So what we really have is a whole nother metabolism, which we call the technical metabolism. And here we can see products as a service. What you want to do is watch the television, not own 4,360 chemicals. Okay? So these things should be designed for use. That these are things we use. We don't consume them. So we call these products as a service. So we can lease these effectively. We can use them over and over again. But what's really strange is that because we have life cycle assessment as a technique, people talk about the life cycle of inanimate objects. And so my test of language is, can you go home and explain it to a 10-year-old child, and will they understand what you're talking about? And for people in this world of design and products, you know what they talk about? Designing for end of life. Can you imagine going home and saying, hey kids, I'm designing for the end of life? It's horrifying when you think of that. So the real question is, we're designing for end of use. And then if you think of that, then you realize we design for next use. Welcome to the circular economy. So we created a protocol for Cradle to Cradle, which says, first, make sure it's healthy and safe for humans and the ecological systems. So we now have databases of 47,000 of the 85,000 chemicals basically used by humans in production. So we can test them against that criteria. We then have a circular economy, of things that are coming back and being reutilized, but they have to be safe and healthy before it's worth doing. But we also have to share it with people. We have renewable energy, clean and healthy, water stewardship and social fairness. And we've created a protocol and a certification program to go with this. Because if you do these 5 things, you form the foundations of all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You can't do any of those without these 5 things. It's quite something. So a lot of people think that it's, responsible consumption, right? Look at this one, number 12, see? Responsible consumption. People go, oh, that's the circular economy. But you can't consume TV sets or all this clothing. H&M Company destroyed $4.6 billion worth of clothes 3 years ago in 1 year because they didn't have market for it. So, in 1995, I did my first product other than the building as an architect. It was furniture for sitting on. So we interviewed people in seats and said, what's the worst case sitting? And we saw people living in wheelchairs and said, what's it like living in a wheelchair? And they talked about bed sores and it was like living in a hospital bed. So we said, what if the fabric breathed like Ramie as a wick? And what if it insulates like wool? So we mixed wool and Ramie and made a fabric so strong, and it gets stronger when it's wet, and it wicks away moisture and it keeps you one temperature. This is the fabric of the Airbus. What do you want to sit on for 13 hours? And it's so clean. We looked at 8,000 chemicals in the textile industry, and eliminated 7,962 based on our concerns for ecological and human health. The fabric is so clean you could eat it. So if you find yourself at 40,000 feet with a supreme and extreme fiber deficiency, you could safely eat your chair. And if you realize the water coming out of the mill is cleaner than Swiss drinking water. This is design. This is how trees work. Then we looked at technical nutrition, and we looked at carpets, and said what you want is the surface under your feet. The clean things you can clean, good acoustics, nice appearance, and things like that. And what you can get is cancer if you use PVC and strange materials. So we redesigned all the carpet to go back. And so this was done for Berkshire Hathaway, for Warren Buffett. It's now the #1 carpet company in the world. It was #5 when we started. Isn't that something? And the carpet is designed to go back. So when you want to change colors, go ahead. All you do is create jobs. We're storing our raw materials on the customer's floors. We're in an economic relationship with the customer. The resources are simply part of the currency of our relationship. So when you hear HR department in a company, I don't hear human resources. I hear human relations. When I hear economic resources, I hear economic relations. And when I hear natural resources, I hear natural relations. We are in relationships. That's the value. The rest of this is the currency of that communication. So now we have products across the spectrum of biological and technical, cradle-to-cradle certified, designed to go back to industry or nature. And when you see so many people talking about being less bad as if that's good, it's really sad because bad is a human value, less is a number relationship. So less bad is not good. It's bad by definition, just less so. So when I see charts like this and all the corporate social reports and everything else, people in business hate this chart down to the right. Right? That's not what we like to see. And yet when we report on environment, we all go, here, I'm going to be less bad. My goal is 0, whatever. Can you imagine going home to tell your children, my goal is 0 and you're making my life difficult because I have to feed and clothe you? It's a messy message. And if you just say, I'm going to reduce my emissions by 20%, something like that, my carbon emissions down here, you think about that too, it's strange, isn't it? You're telling people what you're not going to do. This would be like telling the taxi driver, quick, I'm not going to the airport. How useful is all this language we have if we're just telling ourselves what we don't want to do? What do we want to do? So we take this and put it below the line and say, great, we're going to get rid of all that. Sure, let's go to 0. But let's go to 100% fabulous. That's our goal, is 100% fabulous. So we have all these choices. On the left, we have inventory. This, yes. That, no. Carbon in the atmosphere, no. Renewably powered, yes. Safe, yes. Poison, no. Just decide. This is not that complicated, really. So we just have our ambitions clear. And we have to be very careful in energy. That's why I'm here. That I normally don't get too involved in climate because I have other things to do, and there are a lot of people involved in climate. But what worries me is I start hearing stuff like this. You see these charts, you see? We people saying, I'm doing offsets. Offsets, really? Well, if they talk about being carbon offsets by doing renewables, it's ridiculous. There's no science in this. Because what's happening is here's your carbon and here's your renewables. The renewables aren't carbon. So if you say I can match my carbon with renewables, this is carbon, this is not. That would mean you could double the carbon and double the renewables, you're still 0. But the atmosphere just saw twice as much carbon. This is like simple math. We have to get rid of this. This has got to go. This we've got to do. So let's make sure that kids understand this. We should too. So that's what we're looking for. And now we can do that with molecules, we can do it with energy, we can do it with water. And now we need a new language. Because our language has become really strange, sorry to say. if we're going to get rid of bad carbon, and we're going to talk about good carbon, poor carbon. I feel really sorry for carbon. Carbon has been demonized. We are carbon. If you don't like carbon, you might want to shoot yourself and blow away because you're carbon. Sorry. So think about carbon as our friend, but we need a new language because we talk about being carbon negative as a positive. I don't understand that. I heard the Prime Minister of Bhutan announce from TED stage, we're going to be a carbon negative country. And that's a good thing. Think about a 10-year-old child. Carbon negative is a good thing. If carbon negative is a good thing, here those adults are going with those double negatives again. Carbon negative is a positive. Really? In order for carbon negative to be a positive, carbon itself must be a negative. So we're all thinking carbon is a negative. We have to bring it down. But we've demonized carbon. Carbon is innocent. Think about a tool. A hammer is an innocent thing. If you give it to a child, it becomes a toy. If you give it to your carpenter, it becomes your house. If you give it to a maniac, it becomes a weapon. The hammer is innocent. It is the intention of the user that puts the value in the tool. And we use carbon as a tool. And are we using it as a weapon? Apparently. Wow. So we need a new language of carbon, or we won't be able to break through this conversation. So for Nature journal, Science journal, they published without peer review, which was quite a moment. They published a paper I wrote called "Carbon is Not the Enemy." And the point here was we need a new language, because if we see carbon negative is positive, well, think about that for a minute. That would mean that carbon positive is negative. So how do you explain that to the kids? Carbon positive is negative. Stop it. So we can have living carbon, that is coming from the atmosphere to soil, humus, humidity, life. And we can have durable carbon, carbon that lasts for generations, recycled things, polymers, beams sitting in ceilings and in beautiful buildings like this, all this kind of thing. That's carbon neutral behavior. And then we have negative behavior, which is fugitive carbon. Now, fugitive carbon above natural levels in the atmosphere is a toxin. It's a toxin. A toxin is a material at the wrong dose, the wrong duration, in the wrong place. Right? Water is highly toxic if I surround you with it for 6 minutes. If you jump out of an airplane at 40,000 feet, hit the ocean at terminal velocity, very short duration, very big dose, you're gone, right? So what are we doing putting all this carbon in the atmosphere? It's a toxin. When you're dealing with toxic things, you stop. If you found yourself surrounded by water for 6 minutes, you'd try and get out of there. You would just stop being there, right? As you head for the door on the airplane, you would stop before you jump. You would say, no, can't do this. It's lethal. Well, we don't do toxic offsets. Can you imagine telling the children in Flint, Michigan, where they have lead in their water? It's terrible. And saying we're going to take the lead out of the water in Texas, equal to the lead in your water, and you'll be lead neutral. What happened to us? When did we forget? We're humans. We have dignity. We have grace. We have science. Come on. So anyway, fugitive carbon, fine. It's a toxin. So let's stop that. And then we have bottles in the ocean. Now, that's durable carbon gone fugitive in the ocean. Whoops, wrong material, wrong place, wrong dose, wrong duration. Welcome to the world of oceans full of plastic. And now we have microplastic. I'll bet if you leave a glass out by the table in your house tonight, there will be microfibers in the top of that glass tomorrow morning. And we're starting to see nanoplastics, small enough to break the blood-brain barrier, are coming. What are we doing? So let's stop all that. So a new language of carbon would help us understand that even our cities are make waste cities, and they have air pollution. What if we thought of agro-urbanism? Think of the old towns and villages surrounded by farmland, and those two are integrated in a system. When I was born in Tokyo, we had, as a baby, my mother would have to put us to bed at night twice, because in the middle of the night, the farmers would come into the city on the cobblestones and collect the sewage in our house and would wake us up. And my mother, who was from Alabama, very soft voice, and spoke Japanese. She would come in and sing us songs, American folk songs, in Japanese about poop. And the honey wagons coming to collect the night soil, and how it would be taken to the farms and it would become food, and it would come back the next day and we would eat it. And you're 3 years old and your mother is singing you poop songs in Japanese. You're in heaven, right? So I'm still in heaven. And I still think the cities and the farms are one thing. And we can do this. So when we start to think what it would mean to have a cradle-to-cradle city, then we realize our fertilizer factories are our waste production plants, that we keep everything safe. We mine the phosphate from our sewage instead of going to Morocco for phosphate. We all need 3.5 grams of phosphate per day. You have it in your sewage system. It's already here. We mine it in Madrid. It'll give you a 12% return. It's quite amazing, really. That's what Vancouver's doing. And then we have technical materials that can go back into industry and don't destroy the planet. And we can start to look at these flows, and we have energy coming from the sky. Of course we do. We have wind, we have solar, we have geothermal, an untapped resource for all intents and purposes. Do you know that the center of the Earth is the same temperature as the sun? And it's closer. So, when I was seeing all this as a young student, I decided to forget physics, obviously, and go into design. And I said, if I ever become an architect, I'm going to design buildings like trees. So that's what I've been doing for 40 years. I design buildings like trees. They make energy, they purify water, they provide habitat for hundreds of species. So when people say, oh, look, a tree, I'm going for zero emissions. Toyota had an ad, advertising a big tree, and it said, our aim, zero emissions. Picture of a tree. Trees emit oxygen. What do you mean zero emissions? These are positive emissions. Bird songs, food. So I decided to design a daycare center operated by children. They could operate like a tree. It made its own energy. The children operated the windows and the shutters. And then I decided to do a skyscraper. We won a competition in Warsaw. And I said, you can have the building, but it comes with 10 square miles of trees. This is 30 years ago. This is 1989. And it was so strange, we won, but it was so strange that the Wall Street Journal decided to put it on the front page. And here we are in Madrid talking about climate change and talking about planting some trees. This is 30 years ago. We've been having this conversation for 30 years. When are we going to get at it? This is a building I did in 1994 for Oberlin College. It's the first net zero energy verified building. This building makes 30% more energy than it requires to operate and gives the power to its neighbors as a gift. And these are done with normal budgets. Purifies its own water. This is YouTube's headquarters. The building is the roof is the ancient meadows of this landscape. It's the native grasses. And it reduced the energy required by the building by 70%. And cut all the noise from the airplanes. And this is now going to be YouTube's headquarters. It's a fabulous, fun project. This is for Ford Motor Company. We were redoing the River Rouge, and we were looking at this giant building, which was all organized and planned. And I said, what if we added the world's largest green roof on it? And all the engineers said, you can't do that, it's impossible. I said, well, it's not impossible. And they said, all the roofing companies say, you can't do this. I said, you're talking to people who sell tar and plastics. Let's talk to the botanists. Let's go find the botanists and see how to do this. Do you know where we found this roof? This kind of roof? We found it in East Germany. It was the camouflage invented by the Stasi to camouflage MiG fighter jets during the Cold War. Lightweight, cheap, changes colors with the seasons. Think about that. And here it's now the world's largest green roof company. For Herman Miller, we designed a factory so full of daylight and fresh air that they produced $100 million more furniture with the same people, which was worth $40 million in revenue per year from the same 250 people. The building cost $15 million. So Herman Miller says that the building design pays the capex of the building every 4 months. The capex. This is and this is what they make there, the Aeron chair and the mirror chair. So we decided to do the furniture with them too. So this is all cradle-to-cradle furniture. It comes apart with tools you would find in a kitchen drawer. And all the materials are marked to go back to industry. so they can be reused. There's that roof. See the birds? The birds arrived 5 days after the roof was put down. Then NASA asked me if I would work on the Mars space station. And I said, I can't go to the red planet until you come back to the blue one. So can we have the same team that did this and designed a building on Earth? So we went to Houston, where you heard the words, Houston, we have a problem. And we hung this model from this in the middle of the room. Turned out the lights, little theater. And then we said, okay, this is nuclear powered. The reactor is 93 million miles away. Who did that? And some people in the back of the room, we did. We invented the photovoltaic for this. Good, you're in charge of energy. Can we drink our water up here? Can we drink urine up here? Of course. It costs $80 a gallon to get water up here. Fine. Who figured that out? Forward osmosis. We did that. Okay, you're in charge of water. Fine. So we designed a building on Earth for them. And they call it Sustainability Base. And it's the first space station on Earth. It's on the lower right there. This building was built for a normal federal office building budget, but it can produce 40% more energy than it requires from renewables and gives it to the neighbors, which is the headquarters, just in case they notice. It's designed with an exoskeleton like the space station, wind tunnels, so it shades itself, things like that. The materials are all designed for reuse and disassembly. They say you don't need to be a rocket scientist to do something smart, but what if you were? So we started looking at, say, a skyscraper in the Middle East. How would you do that and make it net energy positive? We built buildings in Amsterdam with cradle-to-cradle materials, a whole complex. This is an interior, one of the buildings. It's designed as a place where the people walk around. It could be a housing in the future. We design our buildings for next use, so they become housing in the future. Of course, you just take out the skylights and it becomes a garden. But the CEO called me and said the most productive thing about this building is it's reduced in the inner communications in the company. We've reduced our inner email by 38% because people talk to each other. What a concept. Theater that's shared with everyone else, for travel agency. This is the Fifth Pro, the Football Players Union. That's the sewage treatment plant for this whole thing, right there. They have an auditorium they share. And at Davos, we built this little ice house out of two pieces, A and B, diagonal and straight. It's a building that goes up for the week and comes down, but it's like, it's a meeting room made of nanotechnology and two types of aluminum. So here's a factory in Chicago, very low budget, but we wanted the kids to be able to see what happens. There was a food desert. There was no food growing there. So this is the company. It's a soap company. All their products are assessed down to the molecule. It's the largest greenhouse on top of a building in the world. And they grow food for the community. We did the same thing in India. This is a motorcycle factory. All the steel can come apart. It's above the structure so that it doesn't interfere with the manufacturing inside. The whole roof is covered with solar collectors and greenhouses. So there's 1,000 people working inside and 450 on the roof growing food for the families. That's our first tomato up there on the top left. Everybody's very proud of it. It was a little prize thing. We had a little ceremony for that. This is for the China Development Bank, the idea of what would a city look like if it powered itself and grew its own food? How big would it be? What could it look like? That was an exercise. But notice the solar collectors in the farming. I want to show you something here, because what we see right now with solar, for example, I call them solar deserts. So this is the kind of thing you're seeing in the Emirates, and you're starting to see Saudi Arabia and so on. This is like this hot thing, and that ground is dead for all intents and purposes. And really, is that the best we can do? So maybe we could create solar orchards. Maybe this is in Davis, California, at UC Davis, but we've also done this in Mongolia and other places. The idea, we lift the solar collectors up so the animals can graze underneath, and the grasses come back. The water comes back. You can use the condensation on the solar collectors to wash them, to irrigate the grass in the morning. It's quite amazing. There's 5 things in that picture. There's wool, there's meat, there's fiber, there's water, there's all these things. The shade is just as valuable as the sun. And think of an orchard. The value of the orchard is the sugar. The currency of an orchard is the apple. The capital of the orchard is the orchard and the trees. So we preserve our capital and we celebrate the currency. And we can have recurrency. That's what Carlos is talking about. We can do it over and over again without depleting the capital. Here it is on top of a building in the Netherlands where you can grow food and power the whole building from its roof. So, just to finish, I lived in a house designed by Thomas Jefferson for 5 years. And when Mr. Jefferson and James Madison were trying to fund the US government, they decided the funding should be bonds that were one generation. And here was his logic. He said, the earth belongs to the living. No man may by natural right oblige the lands he owns or occupies to debts greater than those that may be paid during his own lifetime. Because if he could, the world would belong to the dead and not to the living. That is what is being talked about over here in Madrid now. A world that will belong to the dead and not to the living. Think about that. And so as FDR said, every nation will see its history in the way it cares for its soil. So for a soil person, this means a lot. So when we work with oil, we're working with ancient soil. Let's put the S back and get back to work. What do we do with renewables? So we can do things with that. We can also take oil and make it into soil. But we want 100% renewable energy. We want a cradle-to-cradle circular carbon economy. Carbon is the flux of the economy. We want an eco-civilization. Of course we do. And so do the Chinese. We share that. And we're all in it together. It will take forever. It will take us all. But that's the point. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. So we have been invited to continue our dialogue because Bill and I are here working together, hosted by the Fundación BBVA, and we are working on bringing together my ideas about how nature works and Bill's ideas about how to develop an eco-civilization and try to offer that not only for a chair or a building or a city, just for the planet, so that's easy, right? And so we're going to continue this conversation. At some point, we would like to invite the audience also to join us and then have a conversation with us and have some questions or comments. But I would like maybe to ask Bill, so you are an architect and I am a marine scientist. How come we're working together? So, what is it that we have to do together to solve the climate crisis? What's our role?
Well, when I became the dean at the University of Virginia, they said, you're an interdisciplinarian. Are you saying that we should all become interdisciplinarians? When the young students here don't even know where to put the toilet on a drawing as they study, are they meant to be learning zoology? And my answer is, I don't know that we should all have to be interdisciplinarians. We shouldn't know a lot about everything necessarily. In our business, it's very famous that engineers know more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing. And architects know less and less about more and more until they know nothing about everything. And anybody who comes in contact with them knows nothing about anything, thanks to their contact. So I think architects need to be interdisciplinary minded. And we need to know that we need zoologists. And you need scientists to work with. And so it's a privilege for me to get to work with a scientist of your caliber. So of course I have to work with you. I couldn't do what I do if I didn't work with you. So it's pretty simple, really.
Yeah. So really the problem is that when we look at the conversations in the climate debate, we have the impression, or I have the impression that maybe you share or you do not, that everybody's trying to contribute to solve a problem and everybody's throwing solutions, but the solutions are being stacked just in a pile of solutions, but there is no plan as to how they should work together. So I think what is missing is a systemic way of how all of these elements that we can throw in to solve the problem, how they work together not just for privileged people that live in nations that have wealth and can take the economic cost of transition to a new system, but how do they work together for a planet, and work together for a planet that makes everybody living better and achieves a more just and social justice. You have one of your principles on cradle to cradle is social justice and equity.
Right.
So how do we put all that together in a way that works for everybody? And that needs a plan, that needs design. It's not just by throwing more solutions and piling them up that we're going to solve the problem. We need to offer a system where these solutions can work together, and they can work together for everybody, not just for the wealthy.
I think the other thing is that the reason we all have to work together so quickly, when John Kennedy said we'll go to the moon, you have to remember that when they landed on the moon, do you know what the average age of the engineering team that put Neil Armstrong on the moon? It was 28. That means that those engineers were 18 years old when Kennedy said we're going to the moon. So you see Greta here, she's 16, right? Think about this. If we say in 10 years we're going to do an Earth shot, what's this moonshot business? Moon's fine. Earth needs us. Let's do an Earth shot. We have 10 years. That's it. If we can go to the moon in 10 years, it's the 28-year-olds that took us there. Mm-hmm. It's Greta and her ilk that will give us an Earth shot. Let's go give them an Earth shot. Think about that. I think it's a really exciting idea. And we have the tools. We know what to do. We do. We just got to get up and do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's not all about energy. It's not all about planting trees. Both things are important, but it's about everything in our lives, how we organize everything around our lives, transport, clothing, chairs, buildings. Everything contributes to one goal, which is to keep a healthy planet, healthy people, and happy people too. So that's what we need to strive to, and it's hard, but then we should do it just because it's hard and necessary, right?
The problem I have when I go to a lot of things, the goal, when you ask people what is their goal, they all sound like this. Our goal is to be less unsafe, less unhealthy, less expensive, less. And what we really want as a goal is a delightfully diverse, safe, healthy, and just world with clean air, soil, water, and power. Economically, ecologically, equitably, and elegantly enjoyed. Period. So let's go do that. Right?
Yeah, so we need to, we were discussing this morning that we need to rebuild natural capital that we discussed. Financial capital is obviously necessary, but we also need to rebuild social capital, because some of the problem is that we have eroded the social capital to levels that many people are struggling to just cope with their daily lives, and they cannot take one more demand, one more request. So the reason why we're having, and Gonzalo Muñoz was reminded us of this yesterday, Gonzalo Muñoz is the champion from Chile for the COP25. So he was saying that the reason why we're having COP25 in Spain rather than Santiago, Chile as planned, is that they forgot about the disadvantaged. And they were thinking on the average, that they didn't realize that there was a lot of people that were being left behind, and they were planning for the average, not planning for the ones that were being left behind. And that was really a reality splashed in the face of the reality of their own society. So we cannot forget about those people who are being left behind, either in our own society or elsewhere. we need to come up with solutions that work for everybody. So rebuilding social capital is important as well. So everybody has the opportunity to be part of it and benefit from these new developments. Yeah, so that's what we're up to. Yeah. But maybe we've already spoken enough, so if somebody would like to contribute or have a question or something, we'll open the floor for some questions and comments. So anybody would like to share? Somebody there in the back.
So I really liked how positive you were in your presentation, Carlos, on how many options we still have, and as well, William, with all the architectural things we can do. But how far are we really? Because we have a lot of huge nations that still don't believe or act on climate change. And what could be the next real immediate steps that are being taken or even have been discussed during these weeks here in Madrid?
Yeah, so first I will qualify that it's not really about nations, it's about maybe leaders, right? So, for instance, Bill is a citizen of the US, so it will be unfair to say that his nation is not engaged with climate change. In fact, if you look at the US, in my opinion, but Bill will correct me, the federal government has really a relatively small role in terms of driving the reality of emissions and changes in the whole nation. So a lot of capacity rests with cities, with the states, and with businesses. And I believe that the US, which will be probably one of the nations that you refer to as not being engaged, I think they're probably going to commit, and they're going to follow and track and even maybe improve the expectations of the Paris Agreement. So the conversation should not only be about national leaders, which actually changed every 2-4 years. Our trajectory is longer than that. Our trajectory is longer than the span of the leaders. It's about societies. And we were also reminded that in 2007, there was no single business of civil society in the COPs. So there was nothing. Right now, there's a massive presence of the civil society represented by citizen groups, NGOs, industries, organizations, universities. So the conversation is now broader than the nations themselves. And those citizen groups, they do really have a voice, and they're changing also the perceptions of their leaders and their motivations for them to act. So what's happening today in the COP25, so there's different conversations going on, but mostly the most important ones is about the commitments of the nation. So I think starting tomorrow, there will be 2 days where ministers of energy or environments of, I think, 180 nations are going to give their statements. So each has 3 minutes. And those 3 minutes takes 2 days, and the list of, you can download the program from the COP website. So you have about 180 nations ministers giving a 3-minute statement about what their commitments are. So I think we'll be surprised, but some commitments from nations, so there may be some negatives, as you implied, but we might be surprised by some commitments from nations that maybe until recently they were not engaging, they were not willing to take action, and they have now realized that it's not only necessary, but it's also in their best interest to change that trajectory and work together with everybody else to solve the problem. And yet, yes, it's challenging, we don't have much time, but Nelson Mandela said that it always seems impossible until we get it done. So we're going to go and get it done. Bill, you want to add something? There were some more questions here in front.
Okay, hello.
Hi.
My name is Anna. First of all, thank you very much. This was very interesting. So I came here with a friend, and we're both product designers. I just graduated on June, and she's on her last year. And we had on the 3rd year of our classes a sustainability like subject, and we read your book. I really liked it. I know she did as well. And so I guess my question is, how do I start? Like, I already know that this is something that is both necessary and really interests me. Like, I feel really passionate about it, and I think it's the way to go. Like, I think it's the way we need to do things. But how should I start, like, as a designer? What do I do? Because it's really difficult if it's not like a generalized idea for industries, or I don't know. I guess it's growing, but yeah. My question is if you have any tips for someone starting in industrial design and product design, and for someone that really wants to work this way but doesn't know how to.
That is the question. I think the key thing is just have more fun than everybody else, because that will be attractive. You'll be surprised by that. Just enjoy yourself completely while you do your work. It really helps. Have a good attitude. It's hard to do. But take what people need and then think about what people want, and then find what people love. So think about it that way. Need, want, love. So if you start by meeting a need, that's what they're hiring you for, okay? So you're meeting a need, do that. So if you're designing, something basic, you need a car, good. But that could be any kind of car. It's a commuting car. What you want is a high performance car. Fine. So that's want. And then you can think, well, what if I could create something like that meets the need, but it's also something somebody would want. And then it turns out you would want an electric car at this point in history, because the cost parameters of electric and conventional automobiles have crossed. So you can move to the electric car. You don't have to hurt yourself on that one. And then you go to what do they love. So like for me, I had a car. I really loved it. I got it from Benny Goodman, the clarinetist. I was his chauffeur. It was a 1958 Mercedes-Benz Roadster, custom built for the jazz masters, and he gave it to me. And I had it through college. So I drove around this astonishing convertible for 7 years, and then I realized I couldn't afford it. It was just too beautiful, and I had things to do and places to be. So I sold it, and it paid for my college. I loved that car. Look what it did. It paid my tuition for 7 years. I mean, it was an amazing car. That is a car to love, right? But it was beautiful. And so there are things that we can have. We can enjoy it, something like that. So, just enjoy yourself more than everybody else. Try really hard. And as a young professional, just remember that the stress in young professionals is caused in professionals somewhere between money and recognition, right? That's because the only thing to reduce stress is success, which is what you're looking for. And so you're either going to get success in money or you get success in recognition. So if you're in the arts, you want to be recognized. That's what happens. And if you want to, if you're in money and chips, then you want to count chips, fine. The problem with design for people like us is that we're in a very strange business, because there's probably nothing more stressful than what we do, because our clients all make so much more than we do because they can afford to hire us. We could never afford to hire ourselves, right? So that's stressful. So if you think about a lot of money, you're going into high stress. And then when you look for recognition, the design community is the most egotistical place in the universe. So everybody's trying to get in a museum or the magazine and so on. So it's a total nightmare, okay? So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and you're in the middle trying to do your work and have a good time. So my recommendation, never worry about money and never worry about recognition. Just do your work and have more fun than everybody else.
Maybe one last question or comment. Here.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Gonzalo. Thank you very much for this speaking. My question is to Will. It's about, you have been talking about eco buildings. So my question is, what's the price? How much does it increase the price of a house which has been built to be net zero emissions? If it's very expensive or not?
Well, that's a great question. We always start with the basic budget of the client, and The buildings you saw here are the same price as normal buildings, okay? Because that's actually quite important for us to be able to do that. So what you don't want to do is think that you've got a normal thing, and in order to do sustainability, you have to add cost to that normal thing. The thing that happens with sustainability is you design it inside. You bake it into the design. It's not added. So if you look at that Ford roof, let me explain how we did that commercially, because that's quite a telling thing, because it's a very simple, basic thing, a factory. So when we got this factory, it's Ford's 100th birthday. It has to open on that day. That will not change. The budget to get it done will not change. And yet, I get brought in. And so Bill Ford says, what are we going to do? And I said, let's try the world's largest green roof. So a lot of Ford engineers go, what is that? It's impossible. So we go, well, let's find out. So we get that figured out. It's 7 pounds a square foot. It's very lightweight. It's very inexpensive. Protects the roof from wind load. We said, let's get rid of all the ducting inside the building. These normal factories have ducts to move air around. It's ridiculous. That is a giant wooden steel box. The building is a duct. See? So I'm not adding a green roof to a building that has silly ducts inside. So let's get rid of all the ducting, and let's just let the air move the way nature does, with a breeze. What's this ducting? You know, nature didn't put metal boxes in the sky and blow air through it, right? So let's just put a bubble of 68, which would be whatever, 20 degree centigrade air over the top of the building with 4 wind tunnels that are heated and cooled by the waste heat from the compressors, right? Using absorption chillers and heaters. So now we can put a bubble of tempered air in the top of the building, silent. And when I need the air to go somewhere to make somebody warm, we put the thermostats on the people. So they're over at the edge of the building and I'm cold, they go, like that. And all of a sudden this air just towards them, because there's vents on the building every 3 seconds. They're taking temperatures and sensing. And the building leaks out instead of leaking in, because we don't have air conditioning everywhere. Leaking out the roof, making the building negatively pressurized. You're making Ford Mustangs and Ford trucks, and when you open the truck dock in a normal factory, all the air, cold air come in and cool all the products, and all the metal is cold, and you can't work with it. It's ridiculous. So our building, it breathes out. We heat the truck. We cool the truck in the summer. It reduced the energy consumption by a factory by 70% over a non-air conditioned factory. Okay? So, and we got rid of all ducting, so we have daylight. See what's happening here? You're not adding sustainability to something else. You're actually reintegrating your resources in a way that's more optimized. But the thing that really made it was when I had to go get this approved by the board, our landscape systems, you saw the picture, all those hectares of landscapes, that was the water treatment system in nature. And the Clean Water Act had required Ford to build 3 chemical treatment plants with 4 kilometers of giant concrete pipes to treat the water. We're treating it all with the roof and the site, right? So when we went in to get the permission for this thing at the board, we walked in and Bill Ford said, take twice as long as they gave you. I bet they didn't give you much time. Mm-hmm. And I said, they gave me 1.5 minutes for review. And I'm sitting there with their board. And I said, listen, I know you're fiduciaries in the car business, so we're here to talk about money and cars. But before we talk about money and cars, because you can just imagine what they're thinking. Okay, how much more is all this sustainability stuff going to cost, right? They've already approved the budget. What are you doing here? We've already approved this budget, right? So I said, before we talk money and cars, I'd like to talk about the fact this project is for the birds. And that is true. So you take people out of their normal space, right? It's for the birds, huh? And then I said, but you want to talk money and cars, fine. So our treatment system for all the water to meet the Clean Water Act is $13 million. The conventional plant, which you've already bid and engineered, and I brought the CFO, I said, he's about to sign this so you can meet the law. That is $48 million. 3 chemical treatment plants, miles of pipes. So we're about to save you $35 million on the first day. And with the Ford Taurus coming out of Chicago stamping at a 4% margin, this is the same in us walking in here and giving you an order for $900 million worth of cars. Approved.
Good. So I think with this we're going to thank you all for coming and remind you that we are not going to design a new house. We're going to design a better planet. Yeah. We're going to do that together. So let's design a better planet. And I'd like to thank the Fundación BBVA for hosting us again, and the director Rafael Pardo for having us in this beautiful house again. And thank you all for taking time away from a weekend and a holiday to join us for a few hours. Thank you very much.